Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm DK Roster. We are outside the 16 days of activism, but we continue to look at the fallout of not being able to articulate sentiments without resorting to violence, physical or otherwise. Now, to specifically address the impact of spousal abuse, we are joined by clinical and organizational psychologist Kelly McFarland. Welcome, ma'am. We are getting closer to Christmas. How do seasons like this impact factors leading to spousal abuse, and why?
Well, one of the things that could kind of exacerbate spousal abuse are holidays, because you're kind of inside with the abuser a lot more than, during the working week. Another thing is stress. So, as wonderful as the holiday season is, for a lot of people, it's quite stressful because, they feel this pressure to keep up with the Joneses, that to buy presents for everybody, to go to events looking, all fancy and get their hair done and this and that and the other. And so, these things could kind of add to some of the issues that already exist in the home. Another thing could be just really, especially for experience of domestic abuse or intimate partner violence, that heightened sense of unhappiness or depression, as they reflect on their year, as they reflect on the circumstances of their lives, of their family life. So I'd say, that's probably how the season could affect it.
No, yeah, there's so many things that you said, but there are two things I really want to start on. One, in terms of trying to keep up with the Joneses and the stresses of trying to do so. It actually reminds me of a song from Lancelot Lane where he was saying that his partner left him because he couldn't afford for Christmas. And it's just the other day, well, it's been so long since he make her 5 days. So you feel just now you're going to make her 5 years. But also carrying around baggage from an abusive relationship into a new one. What are some of those things that we kind of need to be looking out for, especially so that we don't necessarily find ourselves like hamsters on the same wheel?
Well, often what we find is that we do find ourselves as hamsters on the same wheel. Persons who experience domestic violence, or who have been part of a domestic intimate partner violent relationship, tend to kind of have a pattern of being in a relationship like that, either as the abuser or as the victim. That's not to say that all persons who have the experience of being in an abusive relationship do, but research will show that the majority do. And that's because these patterns, or the factors that lead to one ending up in a violent relationship, tend to start from childhood. A lot of what we do in adulthood, a lot of who we are attracted to, of what our boundaries look like or don't look like, tend to start from our childhood relationships, whether it's the relationships that we experience or the relationships that we observed within our families. These are what teach us sort of what our self-concept is, how they affect our self-esteem. They help us think about what relationships should look like, what is normal to accept and not accept. So we find that persons who've had lots of childhood adversity tend to end up in abusive relationships. And so it doesn't necessarily just stop with the first one, unfortunately. It takes, some work to get out of that pattern, take some realizing, some insight, first of all, to get out of that pattern. And so unfortunately, the hamster and the wheel thing is not something that doesn't happen.
So to the parent or guardian listening to this conversation, looking at this conversation right now, what are some of the things that you'd want to tell them in terms of the way that they would have dialogue with the persons in their care? Because I heard from somewhere, I don't know how true it is, that many times when we're talking to ourselves, we're giving ourselves a stern self-talk. We hear something that is kind of akin to our parents' voice. So to the parent, the guardian listening now, what would you want to tell them so that that may help mitigate some spousal abuse in the future?
Everything that your child experiences in the home as you were raising them, they carry it into their adulthood. You are constantly teaching your children what they can expect from the world, what they can give to the world. You're constantly impacting on their self esteem, their self concept, their habits, their behaviors, and their boundaries. And so, as you live your own life, stop and think, what am I teaching my child here in every moment that I'm teaching them something? And if you notice that there's something you don't want them to take into their own life, then you have to take the responsibility of getting your own sort of help, or stopping it in your own life first in order to make that impact in their lives. Parenting is a very, very huge responsibility. It really is, and I always try to impress upon parents that everything you do, I tell people anything in our childhood, we either become it or we marry it, right? So everything that you do, everything that you expose children to as part of your norm, they take that on as part of their norm as well. And they'd either take it on as part of their norm in terms of they do it or they accept it. So it's just some food for thought.
And that, when you were speaking there, the word that I was having and kind of marinating with is normalization. So how is it we kind of get this into the psyche? Okay, well, that's part of the everyday existence, and we can look for that outside. If we don't see that outside, well, possibly this is not the individual for me. And that is something that I want to get on to in terms of like start back when we resume this conversation. We are speaking with Kelly McFarland. We take a short break looking at the impact of a spousal abuse, well, the psychological impact. Stay with us. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are looking at the psychological impact of spousal abuse. We're doing so with clinical and organizational psychologist Kelly McFarland. And we just took the break talking about normalization. And you also said there's that responsibility on an individual to stop things not just for themselves, the betterment of themselves and their own lives, but the people who will be looking at patterns of behavior, mirroring or marrying them as they progress along life's journey. What is the importance, Kelly, of getting counseling, possibly during, possibly after, and just coming to the point where you say, okay, well, I think this is something that I need?
Oh yeah. I think the first part of that is what you said, recognizing that this is something that I need, and then also recognizing that this is something that I deserve, that I'm entitled to. I can have a healthy relationship or a good life where I'm respected, where I feel good about myself, where I feel safe, where I don't feel fair, where I feel like I have some level of autonomy, where I don't feel completely controlled, right? Where I feel a sense of freedom and equality in my relationship. So recognizing that first and foremost is very important. And then, really evaluating for yourself why you feel stuck or why you are stuck, whether you feel stuck or not. Because oftentimes, I mean, I've had people come for therapy to build up the courage to feel like they can leave an abusive relationship, right? And because that is an extremely important factor. Because remember, abuse doesn't always or often or rarely ever starts with physical aggression. It starts psychological and emotionally first. So getting to that point, requires feeling like you're entitled and like you can get to that point, and then seeking the help to get you there, just because you want to have a happier life. And I think what's really needed here as well is the encouragement that that is possible. Again, with the cycle of abuse, the persons who experience abuse often feel like it is not, they don't deserve it, they can't survive on their own, they don't have resources, they don't have a solid social support system, whether that is real or perceived or groomed by their partner. And even abusers, sometimes abusers don't think that they could have safe, healthy relationships unless they are controlling the other person or behaving in ways that keep them safe or keep the relationship intact, right? So I think on both sides, for abusers and victims, kind of realizing that, first of all, there is another side, there is another way to live, there is another way to have healthy relationships. And then figuring out, well, what do I need to get there? How do I start with me? And then how do I enlist the necessary support? Even though your mind might tell you there is no support, there is no safety in escaping this, I will say that that's not entirely true.
But how easy is it for an individual to say, okay, well, this set of checklists is not meshing. I want better. There's another side, and I'm going to reach for it. Because two people might have the same experience, but because of nature and nurture, they will react or respond differently. So, what is it that is there something that is a little kind of general or generic that we start from at base level to say, this is too much, this is not what I am looking for, and I'm going to try to see about myself, I'm going to try to deal with it a little better. And I'll even throw in the caveat of both aggressor and the victim.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. The thing about it is that it is different for everybody. What they will, boundaries and what one will and will not tolerate differs from person to person oftentimes. And so, you might look into somebody's relationship and say, I can't believe they're dealing with that, they're taking that, why didn't they leave? Or I can't believe they're fussing over that. That's nothing. That's how men are, that's how women are, right? So people have different values, they have different things that are, as you use the word, normalized within their family circle and for them. And so, that is really a subjective thing for the most part. For some people, it's their children, seeing their children in danger or seeing their children hurt. For some people, it's when the violence begins. For some people, it's when they've gotten really embarrassed. And for some people, it actually just never happens. They grow old with their partner, or they, unfortunately, it ends in death, of the abuser, of the victim, or both, or imprisonment. So it really does, it's hard to say generally, in cases like these, what the last straw, so to speak, is.
But you raised something when you started to answer, talking about support, well, circles, individuals that someone would speak with. And how important are those? Because the same way somebody say, you taking that? Versus, no man, we go by the pastor, we pray about it, or I sure it was just a mistake. How important are the circles of support? Where to someone goes to find solace if they can? And what kind of impact does that have on the psyche or the psychology of a relationship like that?
The most research will show that one of the most important factors in recovery, mental health, recovery from illness, from even physiological illness, from abuse, from drug addiction, for so many things, is social support. It is extremely important. Social support is the thing that helps people feel empowered, that helps people feel safer, that helps people see things from different perspectives. Of course, and it's not the quantity, it's the quality of social support. Who is there for you, how reliable, how consistent they are. And the fact of the matter is, for a lot of people, there are a lot of people who feel they don't have, or actually don't quite have, a social support system. And one of the hallmarks of abuse is that the abuser first starts to pull you away from your social support system. They don't like your friends, they don't like your family. They tell you, stories about what your family is doing to you, what your friends are doing to you. They isolate you. And, from the time the person starts to believe that people aren't there for them or can't be trusted, and the only person that they have is this abuser, that's when, the abuse amplifies. It might become physical and other things. And so it isn't extremely important. And so I guess at this point now, the point we drive here is that like the likelihood is that your social support system still wants to be there for you. Although you haven't spoken to them in years or months or weeks, they are still interested, they still love you. And it just takes calling, it just takes visiting, it just takes, reaching out. But it is extremely important to have that type of foundation, not just for, in an abusive relationship, for all of our relationships, for all of us, for our lives, we need social support.
And outside of that social support, is one thing to say, okay, well, I can reach outside for the wherewithal to continue to do better, to feel a little better about myself. That inside work, sometimes when people lie down, they turn off the light and all is there is just them, themselves, their thoughts, and God possibly. What are some of those things that individuals can use to build themselves? In addition to the way that someone would visit you, to build themselves to the point that they can make that break. How do individuals build themselves? What are some of the ways? Because we know, once again, different strokes for different folks, but what are some of those methods?
So, number one, I'd say, educate yourself, get knowledge. We are in a very technological era right now. Even if you don't leave the house, there is information online. YouTube has a wealth of information. And I know that, not all the information is good or solid information, but there's some good stuff. And we're grasping here at straws for an individual who mightn't feel like they can't go do the ideal thing, get therapy, talk to friends, walk out, pack their bags, and go and never come back. We're talking about someone here who is stricken with fear, control, and all of these things. They can't leave home and so on. So yes, you get lots of information on the internet about resources, places that you can get help. There are articles that you can read that can help to empower you. There are videos that you can look at that from psychologists or mental health organizations that can help you learn how to sort of affirm and empower yourself. And the other part of this is, remember, a lot of times the person in the abusive relationship has never experienced a relationship or where there's lots of positive affirmation. So their self concept and their self esteem mightn't be such that they could just sit and say, what, I am going to affirm that I am powerful and I don't deserve this. That may not be a thought for them. It might not be something that feels real or that they'll even think about. And so something has to get it started. It's not something a lot of people could just pick up and just say it, and it feels true and it is true, and they live that type of life, right? And it empowers them. That's a beautiful, in a perfect world, strike a magic wand. I said some affirmations and I'm a new person. I don't need this abuse. That isn't usually likely to happen. So because there's so much more. But if we say in worst case scenario, you can't get, to good help to get you to get to that place, there is information online that you can access. Start reading. Don't go into it for any specific reason saying I'm reading this to feel empowered, if you don't believe it, but just read it, just see what other people have been through, check the blogs, and let that kind of be something that helps you figure out what the next chapter of your life should be.
And speaking of the next chapter of our life, in a perfect world, we'd have more time to continue the conversation, but we don't, unfortunately. And I want to thank you very much, Kelly McFarland, clinical and organizational psychologist, looking at the psychological impact of spousal abuse. And many times you tell people what you should wear, what you shouldn't wear, where you should go, who you should go with. But at the same time, I also want to put out the call, the appeal, and just big man thing. Do the right thing, treat yourself, treat others with love. And on behalf of the entire TTG News team, I'm DK Roster. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.